All right. So I have never gone live here before. So this is a bit of a test run for me. Uh, as a lot of you may know, there is new footage from the George Floyd um, arrest from his tragic death. There's new footage up. Daily Mail leaked it yesterday. And so we have this new footage, and I'm just wondering what we can learn from it. I've watched it once. I'm going to kind of watch it live and comment on what I'm seeing as it goes through. I do not have the equipment or the setup right now to actually share what I'm seeing on my screen, but I'm going to kind of walk through it and just kind of talk about what I'm seeing here on the screen and explain. In my opinion, this does shed new light on the whole thing. I wish this information had been made available right away, or this video had been made available right away. I think it would have put things in a different light. I don't think this in any way exonerates Officer Chauvin or the other police involved in the situation, but it does change the narrative, in my opinion, of a police force that's goal is running and gunning and chasing down Black people and killing them in the streets for no reason. If you watch the whole video from the beginning, it starts out with them approaching the car, and keep in mind that the police were called to the scene. They're responding to a call that they received. So they should have been there. This is the right thing to do, is to show up with police, possible fraudulent bill. So we can't fault the police for being in the situation in the first place. They walk up to George Floyd's vehicle, tap on the window. He opens the door. And one of the criticisms I'm seeing of how the police reacted to this is that they pulled their guns on George Floyd. I think the problem with that reaction is that as you watch the video, it's pretty clear that the officer wanted to see George Floyd's other hand. George Floyd kind of had his hand behind him, and you couldn't really see what was in it. And so the officer asked him 2 or 3 times to pull his hand out before he actually drew the gun. Once George Floyd does bring his arm out and puts his hands up on the steering wheel and starts cooperating a little bit more and following the officer's orders, the officer reholsters his weapon. As you go through the video, they do have a difficult time getting him out of the vehicle. And the interesting thing is you can hear George's friends in the background telling him to stop resisting, asking him to cooperate. Now, just because the police are telling you to do something, as a libertarian, I don't have to cooperate with you. You have to prove that you have a reason to interact with me. But the police were called to the scene, and they're trying to get him out of the car so they can question him. He's obviously distraught. Now, this is where, when we talk about police reform and changing the way that police do things, I feel like this is where you start seeing the flaws in the way that the system functions. So they're interviewing his friends off to the side of the vehicle. Once they get him out, the camera goes to the other body cam where they're actually talking to the people who were in the vehicle with George Floyd. As they're talking to the people who were in the vehicle with him, they are both expressing to the officer that George Floyd has a mental issue. This is the moment where, then this is about, almost 3 minutes into the videos where we start hearing from the people who are in the vehicle with George Floyd. The officer's dealing with George Floyd in the background, but as we listen to what the people are telling them, they're telling the officer, hey, this guy has a mental issue. There's something wrong with him. This is where the police should have an option to call in somebody who specializes in this kind of situation, who specializes in dealing with people who have mental health issues. The police are not properly trained to handle this. So to me, it's a real travesty that the police aren't in a situation where they can, okay, we're dealing with somebody, the people who are with him who know him best are saying that he has mental health issues. It's obvious that he's distraught. He is now beginning to cooperate, and he's handcuffed, so he's not a threat. At this moment, we're just going to hold the situation still until a professional who can deal with this can come in. We don't have the resources for that because we're misdirecting our resources to places like the war on drugs and so on and so forth. So instead of being able to call in a mental health professional when those people are telling him, hey, this person has a mental health issue, the police are forced to continue dealing with George Floyd. And all they have to fall back on is the training that they've received, which we all know is inadequate for this kind of a situation. So they're trying to get George Floyd into the vehicle, and George Floyd obviously is terrified. He does not want to get into this car. He complains about being claustrophobic. He's talking about having COVID-19. He's obviously not mentally in a place where the police are the ones who should be dealing with this situation, quite frankly. But they continue. They are trying to get him into the vehicle, And one of the things that you hear George Floyd saying is that he can't breathe. He starts saying this well before the police put him on the ground. Now, this is where things we have to be honest with ourselves. Before the police put George Floyd on the ground, he was already saying he can't breathe. That's a horrible. I'm not looking at a justification here. That's not what I'm not looking for to justify Chauvin's actions. I think that what I'm trying to do is say that the idea that these police were just cold-blooded killers once you watch the whole video, the video doesn't fit that narrative. The police were actually being very compassionate with him to the greatest extent, I think, of their abilities. He says, I'll come in the vehicle. I'll sit with you. I won't leave you alone. I'll put the window down. He's trying to calm him down and get him into the vehicle. And George Floyd is telling him that he's claustrophobic. He can't be in the car, and literally asks to be detained outside of the vehicle. And that's when obviously when things went terribly wrong. The bottom line is the officer puts him on the ground. There's no reason for his knee to be on his neck for the extended period of time. Could he have stopped? George Floyd was obviously not a threat at this moment. Could he have rolled him over? Could he have done a health check on him? All these different things. These are all very, very valid concerns. These are all questions we should be asking. These are all things that are going to come up in the trial. There's no question about it. But the bottom line is that the cold-blooded killer nature of how this was initially put out that sparked the rioting and all of these other things, if all this footage had been made available from the get-go, I don't think the narrative would have been quite the same. I still think you look at an unjustified killing. I still think you look at the fact that, to me, it's pretty obvious if things were handled properly, George Floyd would still be alive. But it's also an indictment of the fact that we are misdirecting resources in our police department. We're talking about fighting a war on drugs and all these different things that we want the police to be doing, that we're misdirecting resources, and that we need mental health professionals in the police department to go out and deal with this stuff. You think about the homeless epidemic in this country, and everybody knows that there's a lot of mental health issues that are largely to blame for why their homeless people aren't able to take advantage of some of the shelters and the things that are provided for them, is because they have mental health issues. And police get called on these disturbances all the time where it is somebody with a mental health issue, and they're not properly trained to handle this. And that's how we end up with dead people. And we've got to start prioritizing where we're spending our money. We've got to end the war on drugs, and we've got to redirect those resources to treatment, to rehabilitation, to mental health. That's where the money should be flowing, and we're not doing that. The biggest problem I see with what's going on right now, the Black Lives Matter movement in response to what happened to George Floyd, is that we are starting at the bottom and we're working our way up. We're pushing the police back. We're defunding the police. We're talking about, some cities are even talking about abolishing the police force. And what you're seeing in these cities where you're getting this pushback from this movement is that you're seeing homicide rates start to skyrocket. You're seeing the violent crime starting to increase in the cities as we push back against the police, as we're pulling them out. You solve problems like this from the top down. And you look at policy that leads us to a place where the police are underfunded, where they're being called too much, where certain communities are being over-policed, and we have to solve those problems from the top down. And that's where, like I said, I'm a big proponent of decriminalizing drugs and directing our police resources to better areas in terms of being out there in a place where you are serving the public instead of trying to enforce this control over the public. So I just wanted to walk through this video, and I've said it on other platforms. It's not going to change anybody's mind. Watching all this, if you're on the left and you are a Black Lives Matter protester, right? If you're one of those people who's out there, this video is probably not going to change your mind. And I don't think it should, in terms of whether or not George Floyd's death was unnecessary. I definitely think it was an unnecessary death. I definitely don't think the police were justified in holding him on the ground in that way for that long. I just hope we can change the narrative just a little bit to where we can look at this and say, these cops weren't just the cold-blooded killers that we were initially told they were, and there was more to this story than was initially reported. And I think that we can also make the case that this Bodycam footage needs to be made public sooner so that we have the entire picture rolling into these things. So this is my first live stream. If you are out there watching me, I'd love to get a comment on how it sounded, how it looked. I've never done one of these before, so please take a second and just drop a comment and tell me, hey, you know, your sound was too low, too high, whatever the case may be. The picture was garbage, whatever. Tell me what you think about the content itself. And if you like what I had to say, check out some of my other videos and subscribe to the channel. And if you really like the content, go ahead and share it. But thanks if you do take the time to watch this. And I guess that's it. We'll see you guys next time. See, I don't even know how to end the stream properly. Let's see if that does it.